Well, the majority of Americans no longer belong to a church. In 2019, 4,500 churches closed, and then COVID came in and compounded the problem. John Jessup reports on how churches can adapt to reverse this downward trend for future generations.
For 2 weeks, thousands flocked to Asbury University, the Kentucky campus that kicked off a spiritual awakening across the country. That movement also comes during a time of decline for America's churches. Stroll down a busy street in Washington, D.C. like this one with empty storefronts, and there's no denying signs of a slowdown. If it's a struggle for businesses to survive these challenging times, imagine how much harder it is for houses of worship.
People used to go to church because that was the thing you did if you're a good person, and now they don't anymore.
That cultural shift, spurred by changing demographics, reflects a new religious landscape where over the last 20 years, the majority of Americans no longer belong to a church, and weekly attendance dropped from 137 people to just 65 faithful filling the pews. It's a phenomenon journalist Bob Smietana examines in his book, Reorganized Religion, painting a picture of how we arrived here and offering potential paths forward.
Churches were built for a different world than we're in now. And it doesn't mean you have to change your beliefs. It does mean you have to say, okay, how do we adapt in this world?
4,500 churches closed in 2019, the heartbreaking result of fewer people filling the pews. Smietana writes, it can be easy for churches closing their doors to blame themselves when, in reality, a number of factors fuel the trend.
When a church declines, sometimes the people think, this is my fault. If I'd had a better pastor, if we had different music, even if you'd done everything perfectly, this kind of decline would happen because these kind of demographic forces.
COVID only made matters worse, with many congregations still trying to make up for fallen attendance and giving. Studies show church attendance has emotional, relational, and public health benefits. To this veteran religion reporter, church closures reinforce they're not only a loss for people of faith, but society at large.
Churches do a whole lot of great things in the culture, and they do charities, they do disaster relief, and those things will disappear as congregations disappear.
Smietana provides examples of various church bodies making unexpected choices.
And today, I'm excited to announce that Hill City Church and Capital City Christian Church are merging together.
After much prayer, Living Hope Valentine Evergreen is merging with Mosaic to become one Mosaic church.
We thank God for the unity He has created so far, and we're praying that it continues.
A difficult circumstance forcing some congregations to reimagine their call to serve communities in change, and in some cases, taking a step of faith rather than walking away.
Instead of saying you could come join our church, they said, what if we join their church? So they have a continued ministry because this church said there's something bigger than just us and our survival.
Got to remember, the church are the people of God. The buildings are buildings.
When considering an uncertain future, Tennessee pastor Robert Ray says it's important to pray and to be open to God's call.
You got to listen to God in all this. Is this what God is calling you? And look at the reality. I mean, churches close all the time throughout Christian history. I mean, can we find some of the churches, St. Paul founded in Eastern Europe and Rome, and, can you find the exact congregation, that has that linked heritage? And I don't think you can.
Pastor Ray speaks from experience.
The fact is, you had 12 people in that church today. Jesus had 12 people. He done all right, didn't he?
He leads a congregation that once faced the prospect of closing until a lifeline appeared on their doorstep.
And a bunch of refugees show up. And that group of people showed up, saved that church. It wasn't the future they thought they'd have, but it's a future that was possible because even in difficult times, they kept going.
The story of how refugees from Burma found a home and breathed new life into All Saints Church was portrayed in a 2017 film by the same name.
You do not have an All Saints without faith. You do not have an All Saints without Jesus Christ. Human willing would not have been enough.
The small-town congregation had to adapt, learning each other's customs, culture, and language. More than 15 years later, the doors are still open, now even wider, sharing space with another smaller church.
I'm blessed, because not many congregations our size has this type of demographic.
One idea Smietana weaves throughout the book is the theme of friendship, interconnecting pastors and churches with other congregations and leaders and the communities they serve. He stresses that as churches and people of faith continue in the long and rich history of the Christian church, they should also find ways to minister together here and now to build a brighter future for generations to come. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
And that would absolutely be the key. How can you minister to your community? In the early church, there was an exhortation after the Eucharist for people to go out and spread this to their community. That go ye into all the world and preach this gospel, make disciples. These are things that the early church expected every single member to do. And when we say, well, I'm going to church and I'm going to listen to the sermon and I'm going to sing the hymns and I'm going to give the offering and then when I walk out the door, it's over. Well, that's why we're in decline. It's because we're not taking the commission seriously, that we are to be the salt and light for our culture. And part of it is we had centuries where the culture supported Christianity. And to be in the culture essentially meant that you were Christian. So where was the evangelism? Where was the community outreach? Well, it was all happening culturally. Well, those days are gone. So how do we keep the focus on ministry? And how do we keep the focus on outreach? When you do, then you find that transformation. And then in your service, the thing you should always be trying to have is the manifest presence of God. When you have that, you create hunger in everyone. People want to have contact with God. And if you can have that in a group environment in church, there's nothing else like it. So let's encourage that. Let's encourage one another. And let's not just go hide in a corner, but how can we be salt and light?